Welcome to the Risk Advisor podcast. I'm Sal LaFury. I'm here with my good friend and co-host, Jim Henry. Before we begin, we'd like to remind each of you to subscribe to this show and push the like button for us. Please leave a comment, as your opinion is very important to us. Today's show, we want to talk about drones, and I think we're going to take a slightly different perspective and a different look at drones. Normally, people wonder about, how they're used and the problems and the dangers with them. I think we got a totally different topic today. Jim, what do you think?
Well, yeah, it's dating myself. I guess it's been about 10 years since we first started talking about drones from an offensive or a defensive perspective. And, initially this was the thing that was really keeping customers up at night. We have a number of customers that had spent millions, sometimes tens of millions of dollars on pretty exotic perimeter intrusion detection systems. And all of a sudden, the fence or whatever detection equipment was on it was not going to protect them from an intrusion. And you had this no man's land from, I don't care whether it's a 6-foot, 10-foot, 12-foot, 15-foot fence, from there on up to when the FAA takes jurisdiction, that was uncharted territory. And I guess around 5 years ago, we saw a big wave of interest in drone detection systems. But that was curtailed by the fact that there's still not been real clarity as to what owners of facilities can do to intercept or diffuse or defend themselves against the intrusion, from drones. So that's been a real challenge. It doesn't minimize the fact that that's what keeps a lot of CEOs and security professionals, up at night. But, like I say, in drones, you've got both defensive and offensive uses. So today, we're going to talk a little bit more about the utilization of a drone as a tool, in the security systems. So with us today, we have Jake Schild and Greg Wobshanak from AES. Jake, a short background in his role as a business analyst. Jake is helping AES prepare for the future by deciding what emerging technologies to take on. He is also helping develop managed services programs for AES. Some of the technologies that Jake has brought to the AES team are health monitoring, cyber solutions, drone technology, to list a few. Jake also has spent a lot of his time working with the IT staff at AES, and before AES, Jake comes with a degree from the University of Delaware with a degree in finance. Greg currently leads the wireless solutions group at AES, one of Metro New York's largest privately held integrators. The wireless solutions include DAS, distributed antenna systems, ERRCs, ARCs, Wi-Fi, and drone technologies. Greg has spent 25 years telecom experience, specifically in wireless, including cellular distributed antenna systems and Wi-Fi. Recently, he has become heavily involved in AES drone solutions as a service. Before joining AES, Greg has led the sales and operation efforts of carriers and privately held companies. So with that, let's get into the problem. Have the ability to surveil areas, no matter what the geographical or weather conditions. In many cases, you can't do that on foot, right, guys? So you go to the air.
Yeah, well, it's pretty simple. The drones themselves as a tool allow for where a man can't go. All right, in conditions you don't want to send them out in. All right, the biggest restrictions we have with our systems would be heavy winds. We're not flying in hurricanes. We're not flying in winds with shears greater than 35 knots. But the system that we're going to that we talk about and how we use the drones as a surveillance tool and a response tool. Think of a campus environment, large campus environment, whether it be large pharmaceutical companies or a college campus even. You have all this area of woods and fields and whatnot, and how do you truly cover it? With the drones, they're up in the air. Okay, they're autonomous. We can pre-program routes into them. And we can put a number of routes into them so you never have the same route flying, so nobody can time or figure out where the drone's going to be or when it's going to be. And we get 45 minutes of flight time, and they come back, they land themselves. They're encased in a charger, and we have videos that we can share with you. And the drone comes back in, lands, charges, 45 minutes to 80% charge, and we can take off again. Or you can set it up as a response unit. You have a perimeter. You have sensors on your perimeter. Perimeter sensor goes off. Well, within 30 seconds, we're up in the air. How fast can you get a man out the door, into a vehicle, and on his way? When 30 seconds, we're in the air and we're flying at 50 miles an hour. We can cover a lot of territory in no time at all. And then it will warrant whether or not man needs to go there. What busted the fence? Was it an animal? Was it a person? Did a raccoon decide to climb on the fence? You get there and you didn't waste anybody's time putting them at risk or anything like that, sending them out to investigate a raccoon penetrating the perimeter.
Well, the first use of drones that we saw, the early generation ones that didn't have anywhere near the stability of today's, were used by the real estate industry for basically packaging, real estate, for sale and what have you, and highlighting properties. The benefit there, like with photography, is you can pick a nice day to do the flyover and to do the recording. And although that you don't have quite that flexibility when you're talking about security, because if you are responding to an alarm and whatnot, so you do have to fly in some conditions that aren't optimal. And I gather the greater stabilization that we have in some of the later generation drone products, have enabled it to be a little bit more forgiving and responsive, accepting for, some really severe conditions like you mentioned.
Well, absolutely. And again, they're a little larger than those, little tiny drones that the real estate industry is using. Our drone is, probably got a 3-foot wingspan on it compared to, 9 or 10 inches that you'd find on one of these other ones. Those drones can also be very dangerous, as you mentioned before. Mm-hmm. They can carry little payloads, and they can do eavesdropping, and they can take pictures and stuff like that. Our system, not only you talk about adverse conditions, and Jake will cover more about the different types of lenses that are available. We properly equipped, night vision, heat sensing. There's nothing that can restrict its ability to find what it's looking for.
Yeah, and like Greg was saying before, with kind of how it's weatherproof, I kind of did that on purpose. Like you were saying with security, you don't have the option where you can say, oh, it's raining, I don't want to go out there. So that was one of the big things we really liked about their unit. It can go in the rain or snow. And even actually, obviously, if it's too strong of wind, it can't handle it, but it could handle windy conditions. Like we have seen it, actually where they do test flights is right near the bay. What is it, the East River?
Yeah, it's the Brooklyn Navy Yard.
Mm-hmm. So obviously you're getting stronger wind gusts over there. And we've seen, even though it's all autonomous, we've seen it still track and land pretty perfectly. So obviously still can't do crazy strong winds, but it is designed to work in some really adverse conditions.
So one of the things with robotics and now in automation is that we're seeing robots that are being used to patrol in malls and things like that. And the great advantage of that is that as long as it's got power and its juice and is running around, it's going to make its rounds and it's going to do what it's got to do, compared to an employee that may try and cut corners and move. So there's a difference in manpower, but savings in manpower. But has COVID given you any indication that it would, because obviously there's a reduction in manpower. People don't have the same levels of staff that they have. Security's not bringing in the same levels of manpower that they need because they just don't have the occupancies that they do. Are you seeing that this could potentially be, is COVID in essence becoming a replacement for personnel?
I'm going to say it oddly, yes and no. A couple of our environments that we've seen and we've talked with these clients about is they've scaled back their personnel, their security personnel, due to the fact that you mentioned it. There's fewer people there, but they still have the same amount of property that has to be surveilled. And they're getting penetration. They're getting people breaking in. So, what's the solution? This is the solution. You have a vehicle that's autonomous. We pre-program the routes, like I was talking about before. And you send it out there and it takes care of it. On the flip side of that, we're talking about an investment. Okay, and a lot of companies right now are leery of they don't know what the future is going to be. What is going to be the ultimate result of what's going on with COVID? Are we still going to be here? We have large campus environments that are seeing 30% of their revenue, because the other 2/3 aren't paying full or their rent at all for the time being. So there's been an effect in both directions on that.
So we've seen, with the mass demonstrations, right? We've seen the use of, some departments wanting to put drones up to be able to monitor. We've also seen a lot of pushback from the public and in some of the cities saying, no, you can't do that. It's an unfair advantage.
Invasion of whatever, I don't know. Surveillance is surveillance. We have one that flies on a tether. We can put it 250, 300 feet above the crowd, and it's an eye in the sky. It's a tool. Okay. Law enforcement, actually can limit how many guys they're putting at risk on a large crowd situation like this by having the eye in the sky. We have the ability to lock on to an individual. Okay, so we've got a large crowd. We have one person in particular that's irritating or agitating. We can lock on to that individual, and it'll give the manpower time to get to this individual. We don't lose them. We stay right on them. Okay, maybe with just the lens, because the tether can only move a couple of feet in either direction, but the lens will lock right onto them, and we can track them right in there and hold on to them.
Well, as we've seen with other technologies, whatever initial pushback is there, they start attacking the technology, but it's really all about the use.
Exactly.
Facial recognition, is not evil in its own right. It's how you're deploying it. And I think that, in the case of drones as a tool, a good argument can be made, as you did, for its effective use, its more economical use. Certainly, these are not built to be covert and silent.
No, you'll hear it.
They're very overt. And it's a complement to the manpower, and it enhances the effectiveness of manpower rather than just an either or, for replacing it.
Yeah, we've done a couple of events. We've done the 4th of July event right over in Yonkers, and we had the tethered unit up there, and the city got to see it in use, and they fell in love with it. Because it was that added level. It's adding a level of security that wasn't there before. Because at ground level, you could only see at ground level. Okay, you go up 300 feet above the crowd, you can see a whole lot,
and it's a lot less expensive than a helicopter.
Oh, heck yeah!
And I don't know, they're using some other technology. I can't remember the name, but all it really was pretty much a stair lift for the officers to get up there, and it's only like 10, 15 feet in the air, and how much can
it's like our
eyes
lift.
Actually see? Like our eyes can only see so much looking out into a crowd as compared to a drone that can zoom in on whatever you want it to and still have way better vision than we could ever imagine.
So we have a control panel that somebody sits at, with the drones in the air, and they're watching, and it's a live feed, and they're sitting there and they're getting a live feed, and they can then control it to zoom in on an individual or a certain circumstance, and they have that ability.
Okay. So have you had enough backdrop now to be able to conclude how much more prone an area in the inner city is going to be to prefer a tethered drone use as opposed to an untethered drone?
Well, we've looked at it, and our studies have shown that in large crowds, tethered units are the best bet. Okay.
Right.
And then, and now with the newest model being able to drop its tether, that's the ultimate tool, because you don't need two, you can get away with one. But for actual perimeter surveillance, you can't be. You got to have something that can fly.
Well, we want to get into the next segment here, which we're going to talk about logistics. But before we get into that, I'd like to remind the listeners that you are listening to the Risk Advisor podcast hosted by Jim Henry and me, Sal Lafreri. We're going to invite you to comment on our blog at theriskadvisor.com, to subscribe and follow us on our social media pages like Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. If you're interested in having one or both of us speak at an upcoming event, either in person or virtually, please go to the webpage, theriskadvisor.com, to set that up. We were just talking about let's talk a little bit about we talked about the problem, let's talk about the logistics. So when you have a drone that's up and it's untethered, how far of an area can you cover with it? How far away from home can it go?
I'd say they've tested it out from Brooklyn Navy Yard to Brooklyn Bridge, which is good chunk of miles, because it's mainly just memory that's built into the drone that ends up allowing it to come back anyway. And it's even all right if the connection kind of starts to get a little lost between that and the box, but it can cover large amounts of distances. Like their first clients for the manufacturer were Air Force bases, and they obviously cover huge amounts of land, and they've had no problem surveilling all that property.
What about in urban environments, though? Does the buildings cut that down?
Not really. It's more of the only problem with the urban area still is that the FAA rules and regulations are a lot stricter there. And obviously law enforcement, it's not going to be a big deal if they want to use the devices, but there's only so high in the air that you're allowed to go. And then the buildings are kind of an obstacle. So it is harder if you were in like downtown Manhattan or something to just kind of be zipping a drone through everything, but still is possible. And they haven't said there's any real big restrictions on how far it can go.
Yeah, no, the only thing we'll use New York City, for example, because that's where we do most of our work. We have to get a special permit for New York City. All right. And one of the other tools that things that we're looking at in usage is infrastructure inspection. Bridges, instead of putting guys underneath there and hanging them off the side of the bridge, fly to drones. They record everything. Building facades, same thing. You can go up and down that building. I mean, the amount of time you can save doing it and the risk of injuring your manpower is huge. You lose a drone if somebody's operating it, screws up and crashes it. You lose a drone, you're out X amount. You drop a guy off a building, you can't replace that.
So for applications like inspections and what have you, I doubt you'd run into this, but when you are dealing with crowd unrest and what have you, just like I said earlier, in the intro, the first real wave of interest here by end users was we have a lot of these privately owned recreational, supposedly, drones out there, but we don't know if they have malintent. So there was a lot of interest in drone detection and deterrent systems. And the deterrent systems, they're
all
targeting
illegal.
Yeah, have been told. Well, criminals don't worry about illegality.
No, but
that's another
good
podcast.
Guy is the guy who's trying to deter it. He's going to pay attention.
Well, in the case where you are using it for a law enforcement purpose, and you are surveilling a crowd and trying to determine where the unrest is, if you do have a lot of bad apples in that, those bad apples can also be associated with other tools to try and counter whatever you're doing. So have you yet had that incident where you've had the communications interfered with to the drones that you were using?
Well, again, with thinking forward, GPS jamming is what they'd like to do. Because if the drones depend on GPS. If you jam the GPS, you crash the drone. Our units come with GPS detection and deterrence. You can't jam our units. Okay, they could shoot it down. That bad guy wants to shoot it out of the sky. He can shoot it out of the sky.
Right.
And just like a good guy can shoot one out of the sky and then tell Junior, sorry, I thought you were a bad guy, and give him money for a new Phantom. Yeah, it's a very forward thinking industry, and so they foresee the problem as what can take us down. GPS jamming. We've got GPS deterrent systems built into our systems.
So when you are tethered, are you completely insulated then from being interfered with in your communications?
Yes,
correct.
It's because how it's worked. The power is feeding up to it, and it's just sending the data straight back down to the box.
Okay. Right.
Yeah, it's PoE.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. So we've got a Cat6 cable that runs out in 250 to 300 feet. So and it's just like it's constant feedback. It's a live stream.
So what's at this point, the state of the art in the length of the tethering for a tethered application?
The height max is going to be 300 feet.
Yeah. It's not that they can't do longer. It's just they know that it's probably smartest to just stay at that.
Okay. And the 300-footer is also one now that you say that can drop its tether at that point?
Yes. They've told us, and we've seen video of them doing that. Yeah.
So where do you see the technological roadmap then for advancing further this flexibility? What do you envision that would give even more flexibility in the logistics?
And it's already out there, but they're not very effective. I've seen them in their demos 1,000 times, and nobody's really good at it yet. It's going to be chase and capture. Whether it be a bad drone coming in and using perimeter sensors to pick it up, and then our ability to take off and chase and capture is going to be big. The ability to add different sensors, chemical sensors, along with the various lenses that are available. And so we put sniffers on there, and every bad thing you can imagine, you got to think of how you can counteract it. In fire departments, if we put a chemical sniffer on it, they can assess a building to see what's coming out of it in fumes, whether it's not, what they need to equip their manpower with to go into that fire.
Well, right after 9/11, and there was the big rage on CBRNE, chem-rad, bio, nuclear detection, we feared that we were going to be seeing a lot more of that from a terrorist point of view after 9/11. And, thank God that has, to a large degree, it hasn't happened, excepting maybe for a virus here or there. So the ability to detect those types of chemicals or agents, I would think, is going to become more and more, commonplace to try and understand, where there has been a spill accidentally or on purpose, and, where the plume might be going. There's also been a lot of talk about technology embedded within cell phones because of the wide distribution of cell phones out there to also be able to be pick up that information and be able to feed that back to the authorities so you can understand where the area of risk is. So let's talk a little bit about the night vision capability that you spoke about. That being able to have that high in the sky that's not dependent on illumination at all. The miniaturization of thermal imaging cameras and what have you, as that really piqued an interest now, is particularly for the perimeter surveillance where you don't have the benefit of lighting?
Yeah, that was actually one of the original things they did when they were first making the drone even. They made sure that you can have an HD and thermal camera on each unit. Like, that's the standard unit. You could customize it and get all different varieties of cameras, but the standard one does come with the thermal and HD. And the great thing about the thermal when you're doing perimeter security, especially if you're in rural areas, the fact that if you have a secure site and you don't want anyone getting in, you can just be watching on that. And one second you start seeing the body temperature popping up and you start seeing the red, you do know something's out of place and you can investigate further. So the thermal cameras are becoming kind of even more popular for that. It wasn't a great interest out for just taking people's temperatures with it. They were testing that out, but it's not exactly very applicable.
Well, you jumped into my next question.
Yeah, we all saw Greenwich wanted to use a drone to take body temperatures.
Right in the early days of COVID here, with this rage to think that, you had the ability to look at a crowd and pick the COVID positive people out there. That simply, there's been more of an effort made to pull back that fake news, from reality than we'd like to think about. I think that has kind of gone its course now, and people understand the temperature detection, even if you have it down to, a tenth or two of a degree, that is still not to be relied on positively for a COVID diagnosis.
Yeah, that's for sure. And then also another interesting one we've been working with the manufacturer on that kind of came up from this past summer, wildfires again, it's a great tool if you have a heavy forested area. You can't be having guys walking around all day trying to get through these forests. You can actually just have a drone with the thermal camera as usual on it, and it could give you an alert if it detects a abnormal heat signature. So we think that's actually a very good application for it in the future, is trying to find these wildfires before they actually break out.
And as well as chasing suspects.
Yeah.
You get out away from the city, you get into a more rural area and you get into a suburban area where there are parks and woods and things like that where people can tend to take off to. You run at night and you go into the woods. Do I give up the chase? Well, now we got you. Your heat imaging, we can track you. We can tell the difference between a hot rock and a person. Okay. And with the ability of the cameras to zoom in, we're going to know if it's a deer or a person. It's not just picking up the body heat.
All right, that takes us into the next section, right? We just want to remind everyone that you're listening to the Risk Advisor podcast hosted by Jim Henry and me, Sal Lafreri. We're going to invite you to comment on our blog, theriskadvisor.com, and to subscribe and follow us on our social media like Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. If you're interested in having one or both of us speak at an upcoming event or would like to consult with us, please go to our webpage at theriskadvisor.com to set that up. So that takes us into solutions. Tell us a little bit that we haven't spoken about so far. Some about the GPS routers and some of the guided routes and some of the more solution bases that you have?
Okay, well, all right. Let's just cover a little bit. Go straight with it. All drones of a certain size that are not considered toys, you need to be licensed for. Ours is no exception. Whether it's flying an autonomous route or not, the person who's programming that route needs to be licensed by the FAA. Part of when we sell the system is we license you. We give you training. We don't. You got to pass the test. Okay. We give you the training. You go through the course. You get all your stuff. You get licensed. So the concept behind that is if you need to take over control of the unit, because it comes, we not only do the computer stuff, you have a control unit. So you get to take it over manually and fly it where you need to fly it. So say it's flying one of its pre-programmed routes and it picks up on something. The operator who's sitting behind a control panel sees something. Now he can take over manually, override the system, and now he's flying the drone. He's got to be licensed to fly the drone. One of the things that we have so we can do, we can show people how it works is we have a mobile command center that we set up. Okay. And inside that command center, it's all computers and screens, and you can actually visualize, you can see real time how everything is monitored, whether it's, going with the drones, flying routes, put our tethered units up, show you how those feed. And then if you want to talk about anti-drone detection, we can cover that as well.
What's the risk profile for end users that are either buying a system, and let's say they're all going through the proper protocol of getting licensed and what have you, and whether they are renting or leasing these services in-house, or whether they go through the process of having their guys trained and deploying the solutions, and if there is an accident, during the course of, flying the unit or a hardware failure or something like that, are there levels of insurance that they are not normally covered for, with their commercial policies that they should be looking at?
We had to get a rider for ours, and they treat it as a vehicle, but it's specialized. So you are able to get insurance. Okay. And it wasn't terribly expensive. It just that it was a specific rider that we had to get to our policy.
Okay. So you think the carriers are starting to recognize this as another activity that their policies can address?
Yeah. And we had to answer specific questions on usage naturally. Mm-hmm. So, it all got predetermined that way. But yeah, no, the carriers are. It wasn't like they never heard of it before when we started asking.
Right.
And even leasing, we ended up being able to find a company who would work with us on it. It was just that one did take a little bit more. Like not every company was willing to do it. It's mainly just a new technology they don't understand at the beginning, but more companies are kind of opening up to it and willing to help you with financing on those products.
Yeah, and again, what helped us on putting together a leasing deal is if somebody crashed it, they weren't walking away and throwing it. It wasn't money thrown out the window because each drone comes with 2 units. All the brains are in one unit, and if that one needs to be repaired, you drop it into your backup unit and you send the other one out, which is, we can talk about coverages, and they can get their drone repaired or replaced as needed.
Which vertical markets do you see so far are the ones that are most interested in really getting deep enough into it to set up their own command centers?
Again, anything with a campus, and they understand that they can't see behind every tree and every bush, and those are where the bad actors always seem to be hiding, is behind a tree or a bush. So campus environments are huge, whether it's corporate or school. All right, so those are the big ones. Law enforcement. We have a number of law enforcement. Now, COVID has put a crunch on a lot of budgets all over the place. As everybody knows, we've defunded everything. So allocating funds, but law enforcement has been very interested in it and having an eye in the sky or that extra vehicle.
Has there been an increase or a decrease on the campuses, given the fact that so much learning right now is distant learning?
Kind of got put on hold because, again, nobody's knowing where everything. This is such a big question mark, unfortunately,
right.
And a lot of businesses and schools don't know where they're going to push the button next.
Right.
What kind of training goes into the operator?
There's classroom training. There's 3 days of hands-on learning that we provide, and they learn how to operate the drone. They learn how to take it apart, put it back together again, and fly. Right. And then we set them up for the coursework with the FAA so they get their license.
And we actually have in-house trained technicians on it too, so we will actually service it for them if there's any problems.
And do you see some end users that are actually then setting up their own training program and training their turnover, or is that something more typical that they're going to come back to you for sustainment?
What we've seen is they're picking a higher level of person to train, somebody that's not going anywhere. All right. Face it, in the security business, it's a high turnover guy.
Right.
So the guys that aren't leaving are the officers, if you want to call them that. Okay. And those are the ones that are going to be trained.
Security guard services, looking at it as friend, foe, or a mixture of the two?
Mixture. Mixture. It depends on who you talk to. Sometimes, well, now I'm not going to have as many guys to put on the force. And the other guys are like, well, no, we're going to add one, the operator. So,
Well, I suspect that this will go the course of what we saw with body cams for law enforcement initially. Unions were fearful that this was going to interfere with their ability to
do their job.
And as it turns out, in most cases, the body cams are the officer's best friend because they are corroborating his story and, that of other witnesses. I think the same is going to go here for the security guard services too, that, are kind of getting lumped in, with the guilty till proven innocent, reaction that's too often out there, in a crowd situation. So, the video usually is a good corroborator of factually what really did happen.
Yeah, there's no doubt. Cameras they can't lie.
Well, that's true. And you think about it, and think about somebody that the early days when I was doing the executive protection, having something like this would clearly be an asset.
Yeah,
to be able to deploy it.
We look at the tethered units. We talk to we've talked to a lot of corporate executives, CEOs, and stuff like that. So when they have their little private events, okay, putting an eye in the sky above their unit, above them, then it's like, do I hear it? Okay.
Do you have something that's a little quieter? Nice.
Hey, Sal, a question for you, really, from the law enforcement side of this. Do you see the feeds coming from this surveillance? Do you have to kind of manage that carefully to make sure that it's not interfering with the communications and the chain of command? Because, you want to give the visibility out there to the officers that are out there, in the theater. But on the other hand, is that more often going to come into their commanders and then they're going to be communicating out to their officers? Is it a two-edged sword providing that video out, as an overlay into the face shield of the helmets to the officers?
Yeah, that's something they're going to have to try and figure out. They're going to have to grow into that technology. The way it currently works now is the NYPD actually has a unit that's doing drones. It's working with drones. We saw them effectively deployed on New Year's Eve. Where you got large crowds and monitoring groups, and it kind of gives them a good understanding of not only just the potential demonstrations, but things that you're looking for from the drone at that point is, what streets are really blocked off. If we need to get emergency personnel in, either in or out of a location, what's the best route to be able to take?
Yeah, I'm just wondering if the feeds would actually become part of the virtual reality of the helmet communication systems, or is it just going to be another vector that they put in there to give guidance to the officers on what they should be doing?
Again, that's something that they're going to have to grow into, because it's probably going to be way too much information that's going to be given in front of the officer. It's some of those technologies and some of the things that they're playing with, where they're putting the images up of bolos and things like that, that works. Not sure if that much data is going to be able to be effective for the guy on the ground. Plus the fact that I think the commanders would want to see that first and make their deployments based on it. If you put that in front of 500 cops at a detail, you don't want 500 commanders.
Right.
You don't want them trying to make their own decisions. So it's something I think they'll ultimately wind up growing into.
It could be information overload.
Yeah. I mean, I guess it's similar to what the jet fighter pilots get, right? All of with the heads-up display and what they're getting in front of them.
Well, I think that kind of wraps us up for this session. We thank you guys for being our guests today. You've been listening to the Risk Advisor podcast, hosted by myself, Jim Henry, and Sal Frary. We ask you subscribe to this show and Like us on our social media sites like Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. We remind you and ask if you are interested in having one or both of us speak at an upcoming event or would like to consult with us. Please go to our webpage at theriskadvisor.com to set that up. Remember, you can hear the show on your favorite podcast platform, YouTube, and of course, stream it at theriskadvisor.com. Thanks again for listening, and we hope you tune in again next week.